Hey, we are going to round out the semester on a very dour note. What we're talking about here is the Great Mortality, also more widely known as the Black Death. I kind of like the Great Mortality, it's got a little bit of a ring to it. Uh, but as terrible as this was, it has a it's tremendously important for shaping the world that's to come. By the assessment of some medieval historians, without the Black Death, this giant evolution in European society, um, Europe as well as the rest of the world would be delayed by a couple of hundred years. All of the changes that we see that come out of the Black Death, those things probably wouldn't have happened for at least a couple of hundred years. So this is kind of a bit of a fast forward for social changes. The Black Death occurred, hits Europe at 1350. It's very, very likely that we've seen this before. During the After the fall of the Roman Empire, the western part of the Roman Empire, in the Eastern Roman Empire in Constantinople, in 591, they have a terrible, terrible plague called the Justinian plague, and it hit Constantinople. It even hit a lot of the medieval, or I mean, no, sorry, the Mediterranean basin around that time. It's probably the same bacterium that we see that pops up again in the 1300s. Something really interesting is that the same bacterium that caused the Black Death and very likely caused the Justinian plague, we've seen that pop up in starting in Asia in the 1800s, very, very recently, 200 years ago. And that spread to every continent on Earth in a very limited fashion, thankfully. The World Health Organization considered that particular pandemic active until the 1960s. And at that time, worldwide deaths dropped due to the bubonic plague below 200 a year. And we still see the bubonic plague today. No matter when you watch this video, today or 40 years from now, Google, if Google's still a thing in 40 years, Google Black Death outbreaks or instances in the United States. Typically, we have about 13 or 14 per year. Usually, they're in the American Southwest. But yeah, we still have this particular disease floating around, and it's usually treated with antibiotics, super heavy doses. Anyway, jumping back to the 1300s, initially the Black Death makes its way to Europe, starting in 1343. There are a lot of Genovesian traders that are living in a place called Kaffa, which is a little bit north of Constantinople. And Constantinople is a seaport, and the Mongol forces are laying siege to that seaport, and they are holding the land area all the way up against the city of Kaffa. Kaffa is a walled city, and they've effectively got it surrounded on the land side, but this is a seaport, and so they have lots of ships that are able to bring in supplies. During that siege, and it goes on for quite a while, in 1345, for some reason, the Mongol forces that are surrounding the city contract plague. And before they withdraw, they load their trebuchets, a medieval siege engine. They load some of their trebuchets with the dead and catapult them into the city. And that's how this disease is transmitted to those Genovesian folks that are inside Kaffa. The plague is spread by fleas. Usually a flea bites an infected person and then bites another infected person, and that's how it's transmitted. It's been argued by earlier historians that doesn't really seem like it would transmit from those sick people and dead people, throwing them into the city because they're dead and no flea's going to bite a dead. No fleas typically don't bite dead flesh, and the fleas wouldn't have ridden those people into the city. But those corpses, though, especially as they're flung into the city, they've got open wounds and stuff, and so they are, they do have exposed blood. And as those bodies are being catapulted into the city, the people inside the city are going to pick them up and throw them into the sea. But scraping your hands and stuff on the stonework and things like that, and so it's you have that blood to blood contact, and so those open wounds are likely how it's spread. And then unfortunately, after the Mongols leave, some of the Genovesians go back to Italy, and the plague then moves through Italy and through a lot of Europe. I'm going to jump to a single city in Europe to really run through the plague. And this city is Avignon in France. And the reason that I really like Avignon is because at the time, it's the home of the Pope. The Pope has moved the papal court to France. It's no longer in Rome for right now. The reason for this was that Pope Clement V, he was a Frenchman. He felt more at home in France, and so they moved the papacy to Avignon, and it stayed there for 67 years, through a couple of more popes after Clement V. And this is called the Babylonian captivity of the papacy. But this is really cool because we can see how the plague plays out in a city where the papacy is located. Also, even better is that because the papacy is there, there are a large number of people that can read and write. And so Avignon has a much better narrative than we see of other cities. And there's a lot of educated people there too. So they've got some kind of interesting ideas that pop up during the plague. Anyway, after only 3 months of the plague's arrival to Avignon, and this sweeps through Europe at a pretty fast rate, the Pope starts buying up large tracts of land and using those tracts of land because of the tremendous number of the dead. We have to consecrate this land so these people will have a proper burial. And within a couple of months, those tremendous tracts of land that the Pope, the church is very, very wealthy, and it'll get even wealthier here in a second, but those large tracts of land, within a very short period of time, 11,000 people are buried in those tracts, and this is just in Avignon. And so they were full within a couple of months. And the Pope ultimately makes some very pragmatic changes to deal with those conditions. One of the big things that the Pope does is he consecrates the Rhone River so that bodies can be buried in the Rhone, and then they will eventually be washed out to sea. There's just so many bodies that it's not possible to do anything. Also, kind of jumping away from the Pope for just a second, and then we'll go and see what he's doing here in a bit. Also, though, there's a lot of educated people, like I said, in Avignon, and so they're trying to figure out where's this illness coming from. And since it's really pretty obvious that it's coming from the ports, one of the big things that they do is that the community leaders in Avignon order that no spices that are the primary import can be eaten or even handled unless they had been in stock for over a year. This was before the plague began. So there was an idea that we've imported this. We're not really sure how, but we have imported it in some fashion. Um, Also, though, even among educated people sometimes, and the public at large, there's a big amount of panic that hits with this. And so, unfortunately, terribly, there's numbers of people that are scapegoated, that we find people that we suspect might be doing this. And one of the main groups that is picked out as a possible culprit for the plague were the Jewish people. And this happens all over Europe, unfortunately. And a lot of people in Europe start claiming that the plague was caused because Jews throughout Europe were poisoning wells. Jewish people are killed in tremendous numbers. Some of them are burned at the stake. A few of them are even broken on the wheel, which is a really hideous and terrible execution method. If you're interested, look that one up. It's really disturbing, though. And governmental authorities in some areas, not in Avignon, but governmental authorities in some areas condoned and even encouraged this action. Awesomely, though, Clement V, he really attempted to defend the Jewish people through all of this, and he even issues 2 papal bulls to try to protect them. In one of these, he pointed out the logic part of this. He says that, if you people pay attention, the Jewish people are dying at the same rates that everybody else. And so this is not a really likely effort to kill all the Christians in Europe, because the Jewish people are dying at the same rates that the Christians are, and so that doesn't seem logical in the slightest. So the Pope is being very pragmatic, and so that's pretty awesome. Another thing that the Pope has to do to sort of deal with these issues is that, according to Catholic faith, you need a confession and last rites before you die. And during your confession, sometimes you are assigned to do atonement. You have to do something to get your sins forgiven. And in Avignon, there's a tremendous shortage of priests because a lot of them were dead. But understandably, some of the priests even refuse to go out and take confessions from the dying. They don't want to get infected for themselves, and that's understandable that they refuse to do that. And to deal with that, the Pope issued what's called a plenary indulgence for anybody that had died during the plague. Basically, this removes atonement for now. Removes atonement to get into heaven. So that is not necessary. You still have to confess, but you don't have to do anything to settle for your sins. Likewise, we're in an emergency situation here. The Pope ordered that anybody on the point of death could give a last confession to anybody present. You don't have to give confession just to a priest. If a priest's there, great. If it's your neighbor or just some guy that's hanging around, that counts as well for right now. He even goes so far, because we are in such a desperate situation, that it is okay even if the person that is taking the confession is a woman. So we're seeing, some very big kind of moves here. So in addition to this, because we are seeing, this is just a terrible situation, we also, understandably, like we said, don't know what's causing this, don't know how to deal with it. And so in addition to what the church itself is doing, the masses of people also put together processions through Avignon. They're trying to, sometimes in their words, get the attention of God, to hopefully let God know, the suffering that's going on, and showing the religious devotion of the people, so that hopefully God would end the plague. Some of these people go a step further. in seeking to get God's attention, as well as making up for the sins of all humans. And this group was called the flagellates. What they would do is a group of flagellates would travel around through towns and cities and stuff like that, and they would whip themselves with whips and scourges. A scourge is basically like a whip with a lot of different strands on it, and sometimes people put like little metal hooks on there. And they would whip themselves mercilessly, and just, the blood was just flowing. And they were trying to appease God. They were trying to punish themselves and to make amends for the sins of humanity to a degree. And this movement grows through all of Europe. There are flagellates everywhere throughout Europe. But to us, this sounds, that's not a good idea. But, there's not a lot of reasonable solutions to this. We don't have antibiotics. We don't have germ theory. Germ theory is not until about 1870. So we don't have any idea of what the heck is causing this. And we're looking for absolutely anything that could possibly, remedy this. The Pope, again, does issue a papal bull condemning the practice, and he sends that all over Europe, but it still grows. There's nothing logical can fix this, so maybe we're going to go this way. So in 1353, the first wave of the plague has crested and burns itself out through Europe, through Avignon. What's happened is that the populations have thinned themselves out to the point that the plague couldn't quite jump from one person to the next. You need a lot of really dense kind of population stacked on top of each other to really, really get this plague moving and spreading so much. When the plague started in 1346, the population of Europe was 150 million people, thereabouts. 1353, just a few years later, it was about 70 to 75 million. So about half of Europe is wiped out within a very, very short period of time. What's scary, and you might have picked up on this, I said that was the first wave. Unfortunately, the plague is going to return about every 10 years for the next 200 years. And because of that, the population of the world doesn't start recovering until about 1500. So about 150 years after the plague the first wave of the plague has ended and it's still moving, the population is finally starting to recover. Weirdly, and then this is going to be a bit of a longer video, but weirdly though, this actually does have some positives to it, mainly with social issues, and this is one of the biggest turning points of the Middle Ages. The economy is impacted tremendously. We've through the plague, we've wiped out tons and tons of laborers, skilled and unskilled laborers. And when those skilled laborers, especially when they're gone, that trade is gone, that knowledge is gone. So blacksmiths, stonemasons, doctors, brewers, even bakers, that sets society back quite a bit. But the kind of the cool part though is a lot of those skilled laborers, typically, their wives would help them in that trade. And if their wives survived and the skilled worker has died during the plague, because of lack of anybody else able to do that, some women are going to be able to step into these roles. So we're going to see for a time, and it'll restrict again, unfortunately, but for a time we're going to see a very lax kind of establishment of gender roles. And so women are going to start doing these jobs. Probably not really a whole lot of women being blacksmiths or stonemasons, but doctors, healers, brewers, apothecary owners, medieval pharmacists. Uh, they know the trade enough to where that's who we're going to turn to. And so we have a relaxing of gender roles for a bit. As far as the unskilled labor goes, these are mainly serfs in the feudal system. Those feudal systems are going to break down. And whereas before, people owned serfs and the serf would get a portion of the agricultural crop that they were producing and were supported by the nobility that owned that land, but that's it. Uh, some of these serfs, though, after the plague, because of this labor shortage, are going to move around Europe and they will seek out lords that are willing to pay cash wages for their labor. So, because of the shortage of labor, those unskilled laborers have a lot more ability to demand actual cash money for their labor. So, that greatly, greatly benefits those really sort of the bottom rungs of the social ladder. So a lot of the lower classes see a hefty economic benefit. Women are going to see a really good opportunity for different career paths. And like I said, that'll unfortunately restrict a bit as we move on following the plague. But there's going to be some major changes. The real changes start popping up, later in the 1400s because of developments with labor-saving devices. And you'll really, really see those in the second half of world history. But there's some major, social changes at the very least in the years following the plague. So that's got it. Thanks, guys.